All right, let's move on to flash. And we're sort of breaking that up into like your speed lights and then your bigger studio flash. So you can quite happily use speed lights in a studio environment and get results that look just as good as using bigger studio flash. There's a couple of advantages to doing that. They are extremely lightweight, compact, and portable, so they don't take up a lot of space. You can cart them with you anywhere. They generally have a very short flash duration, which freezes motion. I'll explain that a little bit more later on as well. And their low power output is good for shooting shallow depth of field. So if you do want to blur the background out, you want to shoot at f1.4 if your lens goes down that far, or even 2.8, you can power them down far enough that they will allow that. They also offer TTL metering, so through the lens metering, meaning that you can just have the camera talk to the flash output and the flash will set the right exposure for the settings that you're using. Whereas probably up until just 1 or 2, 3 years ago, you couldn't get that capability on a studio flash, but that's starting to come through now. So there's lots of accessories available. You know, this is a collapsible kind of softbox and a mount. This sort of thing with a flash, I used this so much, you know, sort of 8, 10 years ago. It was my location kit, a couple of speed lights, a couple of softboxes, a couple of little lightweight stands, and that could easily just go with me anywhere in one bag. So in a studio kind of environment or indoor type environment, you don't need huge amounts of light generally. So a speed light is good enough. But there are some disadvantages. There's no modeling light in a speed light. So there's no constant light that you can use to view where the highlights and shadows are falling on your subject. So you pretty much got to set it up, do some test shots and have a look and make sure it's positioned in the right spot. Obviously, the more you do it, the more you'll understand where the light's going to fall and the quicker you can set up and get it working. But initially, that can slow things down quite a lot. At full power, generally they have a fairly long recycle time. So the time it takes between images, the time for it to recycle up to full power again, can be sort of a couple of seconds. Whereas a studio light plugged into the wall can recycle really, really quickly. Of course, if you're shooting at a speed light at low output, it does recycle quicker. There are also brackets available that you can mount a couple of units in one softbox or in an umbrella, and that will increase the output as well. But if you're talking, you know, setting up multiple lights, if you're using your branded flashes from Canon, Nikon, Sony even, they're pretty expensive. There are cheaper options now. This is a little Godox flash, it's just a manual flash, and that's 150 bucks. So really, really cheap. To get the more powerful version, which is dedicated to your system, you know, Nikon, Canon, Sony, I think around that $300 mark, which is probably about half the price of a genuine Canon or Nikon or Sony flash. And they actually use a lithium-ion rechargeable battery, those ones at that $300 level, so whereas the cheaper ones are AA's. Another disadvantage is you can't light for video with speed lights, obviously, because there's no constant light. I'm kind of mentioning video quite a bit because it is becoming more and more popular. People are wanting to shoot, you know, for behind the scenes and for just little snippets for social media. They like moving footage So that's kind of why I'm mentioning it. It's, from my point of view, I use video a lot, and I switch between stills and video a lot. So that's where the LED lights have been fantastic, because it's just a seamless switch over between the two. There is now kind of like a bit of a hybrid between your speed lights and your full-on studio flashes. And that's something like this little guy here, which is the Godox AD200. It's 200 watt seconds. So it's about 5 times more powerful than a speed light. It has got a typical kind of speed light head there, but you can also actually replace the head with this. And that basically then allows it to, the flash tube to sit inside a softbox better. So the way a softbox works is, you know, the flash head generally sits inside it. For a typical speed light with that front flat panel here, which is where the light escapes from, it's sending all the light forward and straight through the front of the softbox, which is not ideal for creating soft light. You want the light to bounce around inside, which is what this is designed to do, because the flash tube extends out. So it's going to fire off in all directions. So this comes, you know, with the dual head options, so depending on what you're doing. So the only sort of disadvantage is that you still don't have the modeling light. Well, actually you do, but it's not a very bright LED modeling light, and the longer it's on, the more it's going to drain the battery. So at this stage, there isn't a mains power option for this guy, but you can get, as you see in that one there, the bracket on the right, which then allows you to put bigger softboxes and so forth on it. So that bracket allows you to put an Elinchrom or a Bowens mount softbox or whatever you want on there. So it's pretty versatile. And you can actually get those brackets for speed lights as well. So this little softbox here is what I actually used to light that shot with. And I used that, this little speed light as a hair light from the back. But yeah, this tiny little softbox, which fits directly on, you don't need an adapter. It goes straight over the top of that flash tube there. Again, yeah, TTL options with that as well. So if you're run and gun kind of situation where you just want to quickly set up and get shots and let the camera kind of work out the exposure for you, you can do that. I always recommend kind of shooting manually though, personally, just because you've got a bit more control. TTL, the exposure can vary between shots. So another option in the Godox range is this guy here. If you're wanting sort of portability, this is a battery which lasts for ages. You can get hundreds and hundreds of shots at full power. And it's essentially a full-size studio light, but just with a battery option. And you can get an adapter to plug it into the mains as well. So this is a pretty good option if you're wanting portability. But you're looking sort of around that $750, $800 mark just for the unit with one battery, and then your softboxes and other accessories that are on top of that. Although a lot of the accessories for these Godox units are quite inexpensive, so you can build up a single light kit for, you know, $1,000. But if we're moving on to sort of normal mains powered studio flash, there is an absolutely massive range in quality, functionality, and of course price. So there's lots of kits available now, some of them coming out of China, relatively reasonable quality. I wouldn't say they're great, but very, very cheap. The main thing that you don't get with the cheaper end of the market is quality construction, obviously, but also just consistency between shots. It's consistency in output, consistency in color temperature as well. So those things can vary. Once you start paying a little bit more money, then those things become more consistent. So if you set the flash to a particular power and keep firing, it's going to output that particular power and get you the correct exposure every single time. And also very minimal shifts in the color temperature, which means that you're spending less time editing later on. And also just from a build construction point of view, obviously, that can vary considerably as well. We'll sort of have a look at, this is a entry-level unit from Elinchrom, which is the Elinchrom 1. It's not particularly high powered, it's 100 watt seconds. So it's actually less power than what this can output. And it's, fairly plastic construction. So reasonable care has to be taken when working with it. And there's a limitation to sort of how heavy a softbox you can put on the front because it's a plastic mount. As you go up in price though, you're sort of getting a much stronger, durable construction. You're getting the metal metal fixture mount and getting more and more power. This next level, this is an older version of the D-Lite 4, which is a 400 watt second. So it's basically twice as powerful as this. Not particularly expensive, I should say. These go for about $325, $350 as a single unit. Whereas these are around that sort of $500 mark. But you can get a 2-head kit with these, including stands, softboxes and everything, for under $1,000. These particular units are actually very, very popular with certain professional photographers, and that is the newborn baby type market. Is because they don't need a lot of power and they actually want minimal power so that they can shoot their really shallow depth of field type shots. But then once you start sort of trying to shoot a group of people and you're trying to get much more depth of field to fit everybody in focus, that's where this sort of thing's going to struggle. You're going to run out of power a little bit with that because you're going to have to use a bigger modifier, bigger softbox as well. And then the lights we're going to be using today are the Elinchrom ELC 500s, which is sort of the pro end of the market. They're a 500 watt second head, so they've got plenty of power in them, well more than what we need today. We're going to be sort of shooting on them about half power or just under. And the great thing about those is that they're super quick recycling time. So the disadvantage with a lot of these studio lights is, in comparison to say a speed light, they are quite big and fairly heavy, harder to cart around on location. And if you want the best features, then the price is going to keep going up. So to give you an idea, the Elinchrom 500 ELCs, a 2-head kit is over $3,000, and that is basically just the heads and a bag. So your stands and softboxes and everything are more expensive on top of that. And battery options push the price up as well. So as I mentioned, the Godox there with the battery, it's on the cheaper end at around that $750 for a single unit with a battery. For most mains powered flashes, you need to use a proper battery inverter, and you're paying around $1,000 for that on its own. So I guess, as time goes on, we're going to see more and more battery options available. And while I don't think it's 100% necessary for most applications, it certainly would be handy in a studio environment if you've got young children moving around, so there's less cables and things like that to worry about. And of course on location it's a great benefit. So the modeling light in most of the studio flashes is quite low powered. So very, very difficult to be using for any sort of video work. The modeling light in the ELC 500s though is around 300 watts, so it's getting up there a little bit. So I can shoot some behind the scenes video with the light coming from the modeling lights on those units, but I'm still pushing my ISO up around 1000 or 1250 and shooting at 2.8 aperture kind of thing.